What is the most controversial book ever? J.D. Salinger's novel The Catcher in the Rye has been labelled the most banned book of all time, often been banned from school libraries for its portrayal of teenage rebellion. But that is a label that also has been given to George Orwell's 1984, and Animal Farm, to Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, to Beloved by Toni Morrison, or Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Banned as all those books were, they're nowhere near the top of the controversial list. James Joyce's Ulysses was banned in the US and the UK for depicting masturbation and various other sexual encounters. D.H. Lawrence's 1929 novel Lady Chatterley's Lover was banned in Canada, the US and the UK for approximately 30 years. Lawrence's frequent use of a certain four-letter word really upset the censors. At least he picked a short word to get blacked out. Imagine if he had have used the scientific name. In 1955, Vladimir de Barco published Lolita, a novel about a middle-aged man who pursues and ultimately has sex with the 12-year-old Dolores. It was instantly banned in England, France, New Zealand and Argentina, and was taken to an obscenity trial in the United States. But however much you might be annoyed by Joyce's liberal and somewhat unconventional use of punctuation, nobody ever put a fatwa on him. He's not Rove McManus. That's a joke for my Aussie fans there. In 1988, Salman Rushdie published The Satanic Verses. Irani leader Ayatollah Khomeini issued a fatwa calling for Rushdie's death. Rushdie's criticism of Islam and the Prophet Muhammad was certainly not appreciated, and he went into hiding for many years. Last year he was attacked and stabbed, leading to him losing an eye and the use of a hand. While The Satanic Verses certainly puts the other books mentioned back in their place, it is still a long way from the most controversial book ever. In 1584, Giordano Bruno released On the Infinite and the Immuneable, a book that made both him and the church a little hot under the collar. That joke is much funnier if you're watching this a second time. Bruno was a famous philosopher, writer and mathematician, and his story sounds very familiar to another mathematician. In 1591, Bruno applied for the role as chair of mathematics at the University of Padua. However, Bruno lost out on the position to Galileo. Some people might think that history has proved Galileo to be the better mathematician, but being friends with the Medicis and the Pope certainly didn't count against him. Both Galileo and Bruno promoted the Copernican model of the solar system, that is, that the Earth travels around the Sun and not the opposite. Bruno, however, was also promoting the idea of an infinite universe with infinite worlds. As such, we couldn't possibly be the only intelligent species. He's basically arguing that aliens exist. His position about an infinite world and multiple universe is something that only today's physicists really agree with. Bruno was also critical of the role of God in the Catholic Church, arguing against a distant and transcendent being, instead arguing that God was present in all things. It's probably fair to say that the church wasn't a fan of Bruno, and they asked the Roman Inquisition to ask him some questions, preferably why the Roman Inquisition held some very sharp and pointy objects that may or may not have been heated, and Bruno was tied up. Bruno was not a particular fan of this sort of treatment, and he did what any wealthy, educated man of the time would do, and ran away, teaching in France, England and Germany, where he met Queen Elizabeth I. Her dad also upset the church and quite a few of his wives. In 1596, Bruno finds himself in Venice, but by this time he has developed an unfortunate habit of upsetting people whenever he speaks about aliens, and he was forced to flee Venice for Toulouse. But by 1599, he was again forced to flee. This time, unbeknownst to Bruno, the Roman Inquisition were waiting for him, and they persuaded him to come to Rome. You can pretty much persuade anybody to go anywhere in the world if you kidnap them first. The following year, Bruno was tried for heresy and asked to repent. Galileo was asked to do much the same thing 33 years later. Galileo, faced with all the sharp, pointy and heated things, was able to quickly see the point raised by the Inquisition, cede his point and remind them that he was indeed friends with the Pope and the Medici family, and they agreed to allow him to go home. Bruno, on the other hand, when he was asked to repent, repeats the now famous quote, "I said what I said." Bruno subsequently had a metal spike forced through his chin and into his tongue. He was then gagged and tied to a stake where he was mistaken for some firewood. The church then filed On the Infinite and the Immuneable into the Index of Forbidden Books for over 200 years. In 1992, Galileo was absolved of heresy. Bruno is still officially a heretic, although the church did express some regret for their action in the year 2000. Do you know a more controversial book than Bruno's, let me know in the comments section. Normally I review books and tell you which ones are good to read, so if that's your sort of thing, why not subscribe or click here to see me discuss Queequeg and Ishmael's relationship in Moby Dick, romance or bromance. Bye bye.